All right, Year 12 Global Politics. Today we're going to be looking at foreign policy instruments, looking at the key knowledge and skills and also some examples. So let's get started. In terms of the key knowledge that you need to know, there are 4 foreign policy instruments that we look at. That is trade, aid, diplomacy and military. So there's only 4. And foreign policy instruments are anything that you use to help achieve your interests overseas. So we wouldn't in these examples be referring to controversial areas like the re-education camps in Xinjiang or even Taiwan, because technically I think it's too risky to do. Be safe. Use examples like North Korea. I think North Korea is like a really good one. South China Sea, because with the South China Sea, although China see it as part of their sovereignty, they are acting against other states in that area. So they're by firing on vessels. That's a foreign policy thing, because that's also maybe attacking people externally to China. So, be careful with these. Make sure that you're not using examples that are related to internal politics in China. So it's foreign policy outside of China. Our skills here are that we need to be able to evaluate their importance. So you might not right now be thinking about which is the most important foreign policy instrument for China. Is it military or is it trade? I don't think aid and diplomacy are as important to China. Now, the reason why I'm saying trade and aid is because of how effective they are in achieving China's national interests of economic prosperity and national security. So think about which ones you think are the most important and why. Also, what we need to do here is also evaluate their effectiveness. So how effective are they in achieving China's national interests? That is, economic prosperity, national security, regional relationships, and international standing. What I've got here is a little snippet from the study design that talks about this. And I think what's good about this is it may help you actually understand that in order to achieve national interests, you have to actually use power or foreign policy. So it says here, to achieve national interests, a state must use various types of power, various types of hard and soft power. Students consider the main foreign policy instruments available to a state: diplomacy, trade, aid, and military. Students develop an understanding of the relative importance and effectiveness of different types of power and foreign policy instruments in pursuit of national interests. So, that how effective they are in achieving national interests will vary, and often the intention may be to, gain access to the South China Sea, which they do. However, the result has been that it actually has harmed regional relationships. So yes, they may be effective in what they are intending to do, but the actual result may be different. So that's probably something to also think about when talking about the effectiveness of foreign policy instruments and power. So we'll look at the first foreign policy instrument, which is diplomacy. So diplomacy does sound very similar to diplomatic power. And I guess there is probably really no distinction really between the two of them, because diplomacy and diplomatic power are both used to achieve interests externally. It's just more, I guess, power is trying to influence someone to do something, whereas diplomacy here is just more about the way that they are going about doing something, is that it's through diplomacy, if that makes sense. So the power side of things is that they're trying to influence someone to do something in a certain way through negotiation. And with diplomacy, it's just that they are using negotiation. So basically, it refers to the ability to conduct effective negotiations between states without arousing hostility. As a foreign policy instrument of a state, it may be utilised through formal diplomatic channels, such as an ambassador, through its conduct in intergovernmental organisations, from meetings and speeches by leaders of states. Now, with China, I've only really got here the North Korean sanctions because that's a success of them in, not arousing hostility and helping China achieve or promote international standing, because they showed that they did not support North Korea in creating nuclear weapons. So I think that's a good example of diplomacy with, effective negotiations. It didn't arouse hostility because they did the right thing by the international community by supporting economic sanctions against North Korea. China didn't veto. They did what was the right thing by the international community, and it was a success. I guess then a negative would be China's use of veto in the Security Council. We've seen this with, their resolutions against Syria, that they didn't support sanctions against the Syrian government related to chemical weapons. That was not an effective negotiation and actually undermined their international standing, because, they were then seen as, not doing what was good for the international community. So when we're talking about diplomacy, it's negotiating to prevent hostility. Veto would promote hostility. It would promote distrust against China because they're not doing what's good for the international community. And the reason why I'm bringing up this example is because it does relate very well to Unit 4 when we talk about China and the chemical weapons in Syria. So that's a good example there. Some of you may even choose to talk about Australia and China, that, the trade war between us. My only issue with talking about this is that I guess that I'm not sure if there's enough evidence there to show negotiation. I think it's more that there was a lack of negotiation between the states, and that China acted a bit irrationally when, issuing the 14 grievances and then deciding to place tariffs on Australia. So I'm not sure if that was a very effective use of diplomacy, because there weren't really any negotiation. It was really a lack of negotiation, and it then created hostility. But I think the North Korean sanctions are good at showing how diplomacy was used to achieve international standing, and, that it didn't promote hostility between China and the rest of the world. Whereas a failed use of diplomacy was China's use of veto in the Security Council in 2017 when discussing chemical weapons against Syria. Okay, now let's move on to trade. So trade aligns very nicely with economic power, but it's when you manipulation of exchange of goods, service, capital, and labour to influence the actions of a state. So what they're trying to say here is that because of, what you can offer in terms of your goods and your services, labour, it may actually result in states wanting to trade with you and work with you. And China is a significant trade partner. During COVID, they were the only major economy to receive still economic growth. I think that's quite significant because, the world was relying on them for masks and PPE. So they were, and they are, a very good trade partner to have. In terms of trade improving, or I guess achieving national interests, it's helped them with economic prosperity. China is a good trade partner, and so it did result in states wanting to work with them and join them on the Belt and Road Initiative. There's 140 states involved. It results in, greater links, trade links with China. It's seen as a really good thing. And as a result of this, it has resulted in China boosting its trade and international trade growing. However, it has been, viewed with some suspicion because of this debt trap diplomacy, when states actually are unable to pay back the loans that they're given and then are punished for it. And we've seen this with Sri Lanka with one of their ports, that China said that they would then take it for 99 years as a loan, and then it did result in China then waving the flag, and people then seeing that as an attack on Sri Lanka's sovereignty, and a way that China was trying to maybe extend its power and influence. The issue here with China is that it is being perceived in the Belt and Road Initiative as being untrustworthy. Australia also has dropped the Belt and Road Initiative. So, China's Belt and Road Initiative, has been seen, as, maybe not such a great thing. However, there are 140 states involved in it. So, it has been, a lot of states still have been part of it, and it does help boost economic prosperity, not only for China, but other countries that jump onto it. Now, also with trade, I think this is a good example of China using its economic power to pressure a state and using trade as a weapon. I wouldn't maybe quote that, but trade is being used to manipulate Australia. So what we saw here was that because Australia asked for an inquiry into the COVID, into the origins of COVID, and also because Australia has banned Huawei from the 5G network, China responded by issuing 14 grievances. So 14 reasons why they, why they won't be working with Australia anymore. And what they were hoping by issuing these 14 grievances and placing tariffs on, beef, lamb, wine and cotton and lobster, that Australia would comply. So what they were trying to do here was protect their international standing. They were trying to protect the way the world saw China, and they didn't want the world to, judge China for being, potentially the reason why COVID started there. However, in turn, it just exposed China as a, untrustworthy trading partner, and also as a state that you couldn't work with. So it actually ended up hurting their regional relationship with Australia. In terms of a positive use of trade, Cambodia is, a really good go-to there. There's lots of statistics and lots of positive things that have been happening there. Make sure, though, you are referring to trade, not aid. So if you're unsure of whether the stat is a trade stat or an aid stat, please ask, but there is a very clear distinction between them. So China's use of trade has helped obviously achieve economic prosperity for both, and then also has then helped influence the actions of another state because now they have a good regional relationship. So trade, obviously boosts economic prosperity, but has also influenced the actions of a state, as in Cambodia, to help boost a regional relationship. Whereas the Australia-China trade relationship, they have manipulated trade to try and force Australia to comply with what they want, and then hopefully influence the actions of Australia. But actually it's ended up having the opposite impact, where Australia has just decided to abandon what China wants. Okay, now let's move on to aid. So Now, the difference between trade and aid is that you are giving things without really the expectation that it is going to be, there's any sort of reciprocation. So, and it's just assisting people. So the provision of assistance, predominantly money, to global actors with the intention of influencing their decisions and actions in order to achieve a specific aim. So they are, the intention is really to influence an action, but they're not expecting anything in return, whereas trade is more that you're both going to benefit. You're both going to get some sort of economic gain from it. Whereas here, you are just giving it, hoping that they will, be your friend. Hopefully that you're going to build a regional relationship, but, you are just, giving away something. Now, we've seen China do this with mask diplomacy and vaccine diplomacy. Please note that I have not put them under diplomacy because there's no negotiation. So, it is just aid. So it's not diplomacy. It's a really important distinction to know. With mask diplomacy, it's going to achieve international standing or regional relationships depending on which state you discuss. And what I mean there is with regional relationships, make sure that it is from within the region of the Asia Pacific. If you're not sure, go back to the list. That will probably be in the video on regional relationships. So as in national interest, go back to that and you'll find the list of them. Or it will help international standing if it's about the international community. So with masks, China provided $20 million to WHO in the beginning of the COVID outbreak and provided masks to 82 states. In Indonesia, which is in the Asia Pacific, they provided 40 tons of medical equipment. So therefore will help boost their regional relationship and maybe influence their actions and decisions. Maybe with Indonesia, it might be that they will support them in their quest to the South China Sea. So vaccine diplomacy is a very similar thing. China donated 600,000 vaccines to help the international community. Depending, I would say it's probably international standing. However, if you find specific examples of them with, Cambodia donating vaccines, then that would be regional relationship. So hopefully we'll help them boost that regional relationship. Then we've also got aid. Again, be careful with what statistics you're using. Make sure that they are an aid statistic, not a trade statistic. So China has provided a lot of aid to Cambodia, and this has helped boost their regional relationship. Cambodia often does refer to China as their true friend. The Prime Minister has called China that. So that really does show that they do care for each other and they have boosted a regional relationship. So that use of aid has actually helped China in the long run. Okay. Now, finally, we are on to military as a foreign policy instrument. Again, we're talking here about external use of the military. So I don't think talking about, the Uyghurs is a very effective use of foreign policy here because it's not foreign. And also Hong Kong is also not considered an effective one because it is, Hong Kong is still considered part of China. So I wouldn't be very good about, I wouldn't actually vote for you to use that. So military as a foreign policy instrument refers to the military capability of a state and how it is used to achieve its foreign policy instruments. The capacity will depend on the amount of money spent on military, the type and calibre of weapons available, the number and the expertise of servicemen and women in the armed forces, and the relationship between the military and the state. It may refer to also the placement of armed forces. So placement, in the South China Sea, the militarization of it, the use of peacekeepers, and they're trying to achieve foreign policy here. They're trying to achieve what is China's interests overseas. You could even hear talk about the increase in China's military budget to, $208 billion. That would probably count as well. Now, peacekeepers is one we can use. Peacekeepers has been used to help improve China's international standing. China has trained 8,000 troops to work in the UN peacekeeping missions. It's use of military power, but it's as well, and it's also soft military power because, China is being seen as doing a good thing, and also, it's a carrot here. It's being seen as, I've just blanked on it, but it's just basically it can be seen as being soft. It's not being coercive with their peacekeepers. So peacekeeping is a good use of military power, also soft power, but is also a foreign policy instrument. They're helping spread China's goodwill across the world. Now, I know I've put here the fighter jets over Taiwan. This is a controversial area because Taiwan isn't recognised internationally as a sovereign state. Only a few states recognise it. So I am wary of using it as an example, but I know a few of you like using Taiwan. I'm not sold on using this one. Not 100% on this. Instead, I would recommend the South China Sea as an example of China's use of military power, and also military as a foreign policy instrument. Because, again, although China does perceive it as being part of its sovereignty, it's more the actions to intimidate others. Its regional, intimidating its regional neighbours is where you can actually link it to foreign policy. That what China is doing here is actually affecting its regional neighbours. So China has constructed 12 military bases, has allowed them to fire on foreign missiles. Actually has allowed them to fire on foreign vessels. That was passed in January 2021. So that's where I think it links quite strongly to foreign policy, that foreign vessels can be targeted as China does perceive this as being part of their sovereignty. The neighbours involved in this are, Vietnam, the Philippines, Malaysia. They are all involved in this dispute, and all of them believe that the South China Sea belongs to them. In terms of how it has actually hurt regional relationships, we can use the Philippine example there. We saw this year in, I think it was April 2021, the Filipino foreign minister telling China to get the F out of their territory. This hurt China's regional relationship because it actually has resulted in a hostile neighbour. There's been hostility between the two, which, could result in them actually having a conflict. And it actually has even resulted in the US and the Philippines running war games in the South China Sea. That's a threat to China. And, that then could also hurt their national security. So their use of the military in the South China Sea has hurt their regional relationships because there's a lot of neighbours that they are threatening. It's resulted in the Filipino foreign minister actually publicly telling China to get the F out of the region. which is showing hostility, and further on has actually led to the US and the Philippines being drawn into a relationship with each other, which could actually harm China's national security, because it does mean that a powerful state such as the US could, work with the Philippines if they did come into conflict. So, like I said, I am wary of using fighter jets over Taiwan. I think that's probably a better example of military power. South China Sea is one that you really can't look past because it does show a negative use of military force, in the fact that it's hurt the regional relationship. But also with peacekeepers, I think it's a positive one because it has actually enhanced their international standing. So that's it for the videos on foreign policy. I hope that was helpful. And if you've got any questions, please let me know.